This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, NFL Picks Week 14. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined by the Scores lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. I got to say, vibes, I feel like my vibes are high, because 7-6 week I'm going to take. As I said, we're climbing back. We're trying to get back to that respectable number of 52%, okay? Obviously, right?
Obviously.
We know how the wave's been moving the whole season. And as we try to climb back here, it's week 14. Last week, a 7-6 week, bringing the total for the season to 98, 91, and 4, okay? So we're climbing back in the right direction. I said the goal was to finish strong. We are doing that so far, so the vibes are high. I know it's been a wild weekend for you with the college football stuff and the NFL stuff, a wild week in the NFL, of course, an insane week in college football. So how are you feeling as we head into this week 14 of the NFL season?
Well, I'm good. Thank you for asking. Sunday was a little bit crazy. I guess, we can talk about it now. I am somewhat of a superstitious individual in that, for two reasons. On one side, I don't want to talk about like records and all that kind of stuff if they're really, really good, because that's how you anger the gambling gods, my friend.
It's true.
But I also, when things aren't going that well, it's like, let's not talk too much about it because, it's all about the process and you want to have sort of a larger sample size kind of going up, up through the season. Mm-hmm. So last week or going into last week, for those who don't know, I have long been a Las Vegas contest competitor, but going back to the super contest days, my first year was, 2011, I think, something along those lines. So I've been doing it for a really long time. And, we're in the Circa Sports Million contest, and they hand out a quarterly prize. And so, over every 4 weeks of the season, or, 4 or 5, is how they break down the quarters. And through 3 weeks of the third quarter, we were 12-3 in that contest. And the quarterly prize for finishing first in a quarter is, I have to double check it, but it's in the six figures. It's like $100,000.
God damn.
And, you look at, and you never know like what it's going to take to kind of win that quarter. And there's, you get set, there's some, I think they pay like the top 5 in the quarter, including ties. Right. So like, I go back and I look and I see the first quarter of the season, which is the other 4 week quarter. And the winner was 17-3 for that quarter. And so I'm sitting there at 12-3 and I'm going, okay, like a 5-0 week puts us at 17-3. And so if, all quarters are equal, that would put us, kind of in the running for first place. Just me, unfortunately, that means we have to hit all 5 of the picks, which, obviously not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but we literally went 5-0 the week before. So it's like, oh, maybe we do it again. So on Sunday, you wake up, and of course, there's all kinds of commotion going on with regards to the college football playoff and bowl games getting made and point spreads needing to be sort of projected before the market hits. And because you want to be on top of things when the market opens and, and kind of know where the spreads are going. And of course, for the Score, I've got an article to write on Monday about, what the point spreads were supposed to be, what they opened as and what they are and why that might be in sort of kind of the most brief way possible. So go over to the Score and check that out if that's something that you're interested in. But I'm sitting there, it's like 1:00. We've already got the college football semifinals. And one of my plays is Patriots plus 5.5. And just sitting there with that game and having to watch that game in like a significant way, knowing that the handicap was correct. Like the Chargers aren't going to be able to move the ball against the Patriots defense. They're barely going to be able to score. Unfortunately, in the contest, you can't take an under. And so you just go like 6 points, which is what I bet earlier in the week. So thankfully that pushed. But, from a contest line standpoint, by the time the lines got opened, it was 5.5. It doesn't really matter which one, because both of those were losers because the Patriots literally never scored a point. And like every time they got near a field goal or like there was a play, it was like, oh, just a sprained ankle fumble for Ramondre Stevenson, turnover. Oh, Devontae Parker makes a miracle long catch. his foot grazes out of bounds and they have to overturn that call, right? And it's down 6-0 with 12 minutes to go. Belichick decides to go for it on 4th and 5 with Bailey bleeping Zappy instead of kicking a field goal to make it 6-3 with a full 10 minutes left in a game where the Chargers, again, weren't able to move the football. Their scoring drives were literally, I think, 28 yards and 7 yards, something along those lines, right? Like, why wouldn't you just try to kick the field goal? But I digress. And so the point is, I'm watching that game, and like it's just literally like score any point, like any point that you can find. Like, this is the CFL. We would just need a rouge, something along those lines. While that game is going on, we've also got Denver plus 3.5. Oh. Right, and it's just like similar situation, like fumble on the ground, just pick the ball up. Don't do anything, and you kick a field goal there, and then you would only need a field goal later on in the game instead of being down 5 and having Russell Wilson with roughly seemingly 27 snaps from around the 20-yard line and in order to win that game. And so it's like these are the tiniest things, right? And even Pittsburgh, which was the other one at minus 5.5, was one where you're looking at it going like Kenny Pickett gets hurt on the 1-inch yard line, and then Najee Harris can't get in on 4th and goal from the 1. And like those two things don't happen. I don't know how, you never know, sort of sliding doors style, like what's going to happen if that touchdown and that injury doesn't happen, right? Steelers take a 7-point lead and Kenny Pickett's still alive, right? Like might be in a lot better spot. So we end up losing all 3 of those games. So like the dreams were dashed right off the bat. And it was like, it'd be nice, even if a 2 out of 3, get 2 out of 3 and still have a chance at 16-4, which, might have caught a piece of the money.
Yeah.
It just get us to the 4 o'clock games where, like, of course we won both 4 o'clock games. It'd be like super exciting if we were 2-1 or 3-0 going into those. And so you just sit there and you go like, was I wrong about the Patriots and the Chargers? You're like, I don't really think I was wrong. You're supposed to cover +5 if you only give up 6 points. And was I wrong about Denver plus 3.5? It's like, I was wrong about some of it, but like, yeah, there's very easily, you always say I got footballed, right? It's like, just, some football, bounces there would have been really nice. So you sweat through that, and then of course we win all 3 games at 4 o'clock. We win all the game, the game on Sunday night with the Packers winning outright, and I have the over on Monday Night Football, which is like feels like it's a miracle anytime a game goes over, especially on Monday night, especially on primetime this year. And so you just literally like win all these other, and it's just like, there was just this one segment of the week that just absolutely sucked, and it was like the chaos portion of my week. So another 5-week quarter, if you will, starts here this coming week. So you get back up on the horse and hope to have a nice little run here to finish off the season and maybe catch a piece of the money somewhere somehow.
Totally. And that's the beauty of it all, right? Because it's like you can trust the principles, you can trust your quote unquote rules, because at some point football is going to happen, right? But the goal is, as you mentioned, right, why the importance of the numbers, and here's my record this week and here's my record last week. Like, it's about the full season, and the full season, me showing the numbers, just trying to show like, hey, this is what we're doing here, that type of thing. The week by week is more so for the people just, scouring on their timeline and see like, oh, okay, this is going pretty well. Let's jump in on board. Because I mean, again, it's week 15, it's week 14, 15th episode of this pod. So if you're just finding out about this now, where you been, first off, because there's money to be made, and there'll be more money to be made down the line here as we continue and we head into this week 14, as always, on Thursday Night Football. The Patriots are at the Steelers. Steelers, 6-point favorites. As you mentioned, the Patriots gave up 10 points or less in their last 3 games and somehow have lost all 3 games. How is that possible? I don't even know, but it was a thing that happened. This game has a potential to be really, really bad. And then wait, hold on. Is that Mitch Trubisky's music I hear as he will be starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers? This game is, to me, I know you just talked about the rough life it was watching the Patriots just needing to put up any points, but I'm signing myself up here to do the same thing this week on Thursday night and be like, can you guys just please score a point? Just kick a field goal at some point, because I don't know how much the Steelers are going to be able to put up, even with Pickett or Trubisky. So give me the Patriots and the points, and I'm just going to hope that maybe the defense can score a point or something. Let's figure things out here, guys.
Yeah, how down bad are the Steelers that the Patriots literally got shut out by the Chargers, by the way, at home on Sunday, and this line compared to the look-ahead line of -6.5, the line went towards the Patriots. Right on reopen, it was like 6.5's too high, and it's like, well, the Patriots didn't score last week. It's like still too high, like they literally didn't cover despite only giving up 6. Like, sorry, still too high for the Steelers. So that's so we're down to 6 here, as money has come in a little bit here on the Patriots. Listen, this is one where the headline for me is, I don't want anything to do with the side or the total, right? Because you can make cases. I don't know if you can make case for either. Any case that you're making for either is a case against the opposite, right? Like the only case for the Patriots is I don't want to lay 6 points with Mitch Trubisky, and that's a completely viable argument, right? And the case against betting on the Steelers -6 is like, I don't. The Patriots can't score, so like, why? You know what I mean? Like, taking the points is cool, but like, we just tried that, with the Chargers, and then you go, okay, the total. It's like, all right, do I want the over? It's like, not with these two teams, not with these two quarterbacks, and like the total starts with a 2. So like, I'm not betting the under because it's literally there hasn't been a total that started with a 2 in 30 years.
That's insane.
It's like, and like we've gone through a couple of different eras as far as like higher offense and offensive, promotion since then. I know scoring is down this year and has been for the last couple of years, but that's relative to a few years ago. That's not relative to 1993. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I don't want either side. I don't want either total here. And so I'm not going to bet on either of those things. However, there's always something to bet because, it's Thursday night. So we got a couple of props that are going to be put up over at the Score. But if you're going to bet on a side or one team or the other, knowing that this total is so low and that every point matters and that both quarterbacks are equally inept, there's probably going to be a high leverage play, special teams, fumble, interception, you know what I mean? All these sorts of things that have nothing to do with offensive efficiency. Like, you tell me who's more likely to do that. I don't know. But if both teams are just as likely to screw it up and just as likely to take advantage of that screw up, then why isn't the money line just the play? The Patriots are plus 220 on the money line, right? Like, if they score at all, 7, 10, they're very live to win the game because, as you just mentioned, they haven't given up more than 10 points in like over a month. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I'm going to make a bet at all, like instead of maybe necessarily like a full bet, like maybe a half unit plus 230 on the money line on the Patriots and this game like could very well just end 6-3. You tell me you're positive who's going to win a 6-3, 9-3, 12-10 football game between these two teams. Yeah. And as much as we make fun of the Patriots offense, which is obviously just absolutely dreadful, it's not like they've never scored before. So like it could score 10. And is 10 enough to win against Mitch Trubisky and the Steelers outfit? Like, and again, those 10 points might have nothing to do with the offense. This could be these teams. Literally, one of them scores a field goal. Maybe there's an offensive or an offense pass, but a pass interference that helps the offense. 30-yard type play. They kick a field goal from like 47 yards out. They kick off to the other team. The other team is sitting there on the 25-yard line. They get sacked. They end up punting from their own 12. The other team then, gets good field position again and could potentially kick another field goal with very limited success on offense, right? So I think there's actually going to be a lot of field goals potentially in this game because both of these coaches are going to look at this and be like, anytime I can get remotely close to scoring points, like we're probably not crossing the goal line here. But like, let's kick the field goal. Like, don't go for it on 4th and 5. Don't go for it on 4th down at all. Mike Tomlin is often a conservative head coach. Up until the fact that he was going for it on 4th and 5, Bill Belichick has always been a, hey, let's punt it first type of a situation type of a guy. So I think that there could be a lot of field goals in this game. So that's a bit of a hint as to where we might end up when it gets deep into the weeds from a prop perspective on Thursday night.
I'm going to say this, and I'm an NBA guy. This game is so terrible that I'm going to give you a special inside to Thursday night. And I don't know if the NFL was like, listen, NBA, we've stolen all your thunder. We've stolen Christmas Day from you. We make Thanksgiving a day. We're putting games on every day of the week. We're coming for your bag. But your new in-season tournament, the Thursday night game, we gave you a Patriots Steelers matchup for your big semifinal in Las Vegas. Here's my insight for y'all. Lakers -1.5 on Thursday night in the semifinals. The refs will be reffing to get the Lakers into the finals of the in-season tournament.
Who are they playing against? This is how the Pellies. Okay.
The Pelicans. Right. It'll be a home crowd. Lakers fans will travel to Vegas to be there and yell and cheer, and the refs will be reffing. I don't know if you saw the end of the game against the Suns.
What if?
But anyways,
what if? I've been deep into the portal, the transfer portal. Did Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger have any eligibility left to come back and play in this game?
Right.
Because like the
promo. What was the promo? It was Bill Belichick and TJ Watt.
Yeah. I don't think Bill Belichick has much chance blocking TJ Watt, if we're being completely honest.
Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like, how did they let that go? Like, you could have easily just put Mike Tomlin up there with Belichick, and then nobody would have said anything.
It's true.
Right? Everyone would have been like, you know what? Two of the great coaches of their eras, blah, blah, blah. Like, you could have spun that into something.
The funniest part is everybody who's mentioned that, like, has never said a player, like they've never said, oh, I would have put this Patriots player in that place, right? Like normally when something weird like that sort of happens, you go like, oh, they couldn't put blah 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 into that spot. It's like there's nobody that you could like straight face like put as a player, like Ezekiel Elliott. Like imagine that, like Juju Smith-Schuster, like
Zeke. They'd have to still be photoshopping out of his Cowboys uniform.
Imagine they put like a Patriots defender who, again, like their defense as a whole is very good, but like you would literally have to put a defensive player, but then explain who that player is because nobody would recognize, who that guy is.
They'd have to put names up there for sure.
Yeah. Imagine they put like JC Jackson up there who like bottomed out with the Chargers and like showed up.
Amazing. And you know what? We'll all still be tuning in to watch this Thursday night football game, which is the beauty of the NFL.
It will be very entertaining and high comedy. Like, and that's what happened on Monday night. I said, I don't know if you saw the promos for that game, like throughout the weekend, but there was no words associated with it. It was just some classic Snoop Dogg underneath it. Right. And it was like, and I said to my wife, it was like, honestly, like just having, some Snoop under that promo, like, that made that game look really, really interesting, and there's nothing about that game that's interesting. She's like, you don't think there's anything interesting about Jaguars Bengals? And I was like, no, of course there isn't. And then Jags Bengals like turned out to be like the most fun game of the year, right? And so I don't think it's going to be that as far as like high scoring, like back and forth, but like it's going to be high comedy at the very least. And like I can do that on a Thursday night, a little eggnog going, sarsaparilla.
You got the eggnog going already.
I don't like eggnog.
I mean,
but
it is December.
It's symbolic, right?
I got you. Fair enough.
Yeah, give me a hot beverage with some Kahlua in there, and let's get cozy as hell.
Let's get to some like big boy games here because I still think, despite the fact the Bills have struggled this season, I still think Bills Chiefs qualifies as a big boy game. This isn't the same Chiefs team that we're used to, but I still feel like the margins have been so slim that even without any actual receivers or playmakers outside of Mahomes and Kelsey, sometimes they should have won a bunch of those games that they've just recently lost and obviously not covered. So you're giving me a line now of 2, and let's say MVS actually catches a ball, like, hey, maybe do your job and catch one.
In fairness, it's a pretty big assumption though.
Fair, totally fair. I'm still rolling with the Chiefs here, laying the 2 points, which I know doesn't surprise you at all, but the Chiefs at under a field goal. I still think it's just funny how we're talking about the Chiefs as if it's over, it's done. And it's like, it's not like they're getting blown out in these games. They're losing by not being able to make the plays we've been used to seeing them make. So why can't that change at some point? Not asking you to do a lot here, just saying win by a field goal. My ask is going down here from the Chiefs. It's not win by a touchdown anymore. It's like, just win by a field goal. Let's go. Chiefs -2.
It's true, right? And so this is this is obviously a downgrade for the Chiefs, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but part of that is okay, why is it a downgrade? How much do we have to watch of the Chiefs to know that like the offense isn't right?
Yeah.
Right. Travis Kelce, for whatever reason, isn't right. Maybe he's in that sort of, tough spot in a relationship where, he's not completely single and can do whatever he wants, and he's not married. So he's got nobody kind of like, the attention is sort of not divided. But when he's dating, right? Like he's again, his attention is elsewhere. And, I don't think Travis Kelce's necessarily washed, but like, it's one thing or the other, right? Either the play has gone down because he's not at his peak anymore, or it's something else. But obviously the other guys are the issue too, right? And just the connection that Patrick Mahomes doesn't seem to have with them. But for me here, the reason that this number is kind of going where it is on the defense, which at the start of the season, early on and right through up until recently, is a very sort of scary prospect where it's like, oh man, like the Chiefs have a defense and they have Patrick Mahomes. Like that's very concerning. The injuries are piling up. Injuries are piling up big time on that defense, right? They had, Bolton was already out before that last game. You saw Drew Tranquill go down. Chris Collinsworth was, just pointing out like, look, this isn't it, right? Like we're onto a third string sort of middle linebacker type situation. Like that's not going to work. We saw some, DBs going down. They just played on the Sunday night game where at this point in the season, somewhat thematically for the next couple of weeks here, the schedule is starting to pile up on these teams, right? And we've seen it. We'll talk about it with Philadelphia here a little bit later on. But like Kansas City is kind of in this same spot where, because you've got Thanksgiving games and Thursday night games and bye weeks sort of pushed later on in the season, you've got some of these teams who had their bye week in like week 6. And like that was cool for back then. But like when you have it now, or like in the last, we have 6 teams coming off of a bye week.
Yeah.
When you have it later on in the season, or you have these Thursday games which create like 10-day sort of, rest windows, that matters a lot more right now than it does early on in the season, where it's like, oh, you played on the first Thursday or the second Thursday night, you have a 10-day, 10 days off between week 1 and week 2 and week 3 and week 4. Like, okay, cool. But like a 10-day like week, or 2 weeks off here, the way the Bills have with the, having this bye week that they just had, it's like, that's a massive, massive deal, especially for a team that was pretty banged up with the Bills. Now, they're not going to get back the key cogs that we have talked about, them missing after week 6. But what they are going to, everybody else is going to get a little bit healthier, right? Everybody's going to be sort of on that level. Whereas for the Chiefs, it's like whatever injury may be hampering Travis Kelce, if that's the case, right? That's not going to heal in the 6 days off in between. Like I mentioned, the defensive injuries aren't going to heal in that brief period of time. And so this line that was a look-ahead line of 3, saw it tick down to 2.5, I think because of a drop with the Chiefs rating. But I think there's also kind of a groundswell for a Bills push here. Like, when they lost to the Eagles in the way that they did, it was sort of like, oh man, like they're done now. But you look around, and again, Trevor Lawrence gets hurt, and it seems like he's going to be back, at some point this season, maybe earlier than we necessarily think. But you look around at the rest of the AFC, and you're just like, good God, these wildcard teams are just dreadful, and in dreadful circumstances too, because of the quarterback situations, right? And you're just like, man, if the Bills could win this game. It's like maybe like a 9-7 record is sort of becomes very doable. And depending on what games they win down the stretch, right? Like a win here is another AFC victory, right? Which obviously AFC wins is a primary tiebreaker. You kind of never know. And I sort of look at the Bills as a team that I have a ticket on them to not make the playoffs at like plus 220, something along those lines from before the season that we would have talked about likely on the pregame show, or if you've read my stuff over at the Score. But it's like now that they're plus 330, I think it is, to make the playoffs, I kind of want a little piece of that too, right? Because it's like, I think you watch, you see their, as I mentioned, right? Like part of it is the Chiefs rating coming down. I think part of the thing is the Bills rating certainly has to come up for this number to make sense. And then it's up to you to decide, all right, the Bills as a team kind of rated in the low, set, like let's say 70, right? We always talk about sort of out of 100, are the Bills right now a 70 out of 100? A couple of 3-4 weeks ago, they certainly weren't. And that was the time when we were fading them and cashing all those bets on against the spread, right? And then when they played the Eagles, it was like, okay, like, I think this is the time now, obviously after firing the offensive coordinator and stuff, like here comes the push. And while that push came, short, I think the very next week, if they had played, like that might be an issue. But as you sit back and you watch and you look at these other teams, and it's like the Browns who's the quarterback on the Browns? Like Joe Flacco? Like what? And like they lose a game, right? And the Steelers lose a game. And like, by the way, their quarterback is hurt to the point where we're talking ourselves into thinking the Patriots can beat them. And it's like, well, the Steelers and the Browns keep taking L's here. And no one else is necessarily like going on a massive heater. And like, the Colts are suddenly in like the mix. It's like, if I'm the Bills and I come into the season with the talent and sort of the theory that this team is right there with a team like the Chiefs, right there with a team like the healthy Bengals. I think I can win these last 5 games. And, if the order was different and the Chiefs were in the last game after the Bills had already been eliminated, I think it'd be a different story. But I think if you're looking around at the AFC right now and you're like, we can pass all these teams, or at least the teams that we need to pass to like get that 7 seed and be a really, really interesting road team.
Hell yeah.
In that first week, like this is like everything into the pool here. And I know they did that, but it's not like they did it last week where you see a lot of these teams coming off of big, hard-fought games, rivalry games, revenge games, all of these sorts of things, and then trying to get it up again a week later. They had the week off, and at this point, I think that really, really matters. These late bye weeks, like, I don't know if the league is going to have these bye weeks this late much longer, because I think there is a pretty significant competitive advantage. And I think that's what the market is showing here by moving this off of 3. I grabbed some Bills plus 3 when I could. And now we're down to a point where it's like, you kind of have to bet whether the Bills are going to win this game or not. Mm-hmm. And like, I realize why, like the Chiefs are very enticing at -2, but they were very enticing at -2 when they lost outright to the Eagles 2-3 weeks ago on Monday Night Football. Mm-hmm. And so I just go like, I kind of think the Bills are going to win this game. Having watched the Bills, beat the Chiefs last year in Kansas City in the regular season, it's like they know they can do it, right? And like it sets up really nicely for them where like you can't be that afraid of the road team in the same way that like San Francisco wasn't a team that you should be afraid of, betting on last week on the road against Philadelphia, because that schedule situation, like that was a really big deal. And I think this is too.
Yeah, it's a very interesting spot. This solely is just, for me, the reason why I'm on the Chiefs is just as I think it'll be a close game. I think it's going to come down to the end, and I want to be on the side of Mahomes in that situation over Josh Allen. I mean, obviously there's a world where the Bills just rolled them, which like if we came back next week and we're like, yo, the Bills just rolled them, cool, no problem. I'm not stunned by that. I totally get it. Cool.
In the regular, and this is just one last thing worth mentioning, right? In the regular season game last year, right, there was injuries to the Kansas City corners, and the Bills succeeded on offense by taking those one-on-one shots against the backup corner for the Chiefs. So whether it's a corner injury, which I know there are some, DB injuries, right? I think Cook was out for the Chiefs, and obviously we talked about the middle linebacker element. Like, maybe that's Dalton Kincaid. Right? Yeah. Where it's like, we know the Bills can game plan for the Chiefs to take advantage of what the Chiefs are hurting at right now. And late in that game, again, defense being like different as far as the health situation for the Bills, like Mahomes had a chance to win that game in the regular season. People always forget about regular season games because of like the playoff games that sort of are more sort of forefront in our mind, right? Obviously pulling off the 13 seconds thing from the playoffs a couple of years ago. But it's like, no, last year Mahomes couldn't get it done, right? And yeah, absolutely, right? Tyreek Hill, walking through that door, and I understand why obviously they had to trade Tyreek Hill to spread that money around and get the defense that they have when that defense is healthy. But unless somebody else is going to kind of replace that, MVS is running those routes, man, but he's not catching those balls. So
it's true.
It's true. And assuming that he's going to, like, I'm sorry, like,
hold on. You're talking about like Mahomes not coming through last year against the Bills. I'm talking about Mahomes not coming through the last few weeks, right? He hasn't been able to do it. So it's just a matter of, me riding with the Chiefs. It's nothing more. We've been doing this pod for long enough that what's going down. Yeah. Let's keep it going though. We got the Rams at the Ravens. Another really good game. This could be much like you were just talking about with the spot and the Bills in the terms of where their schedule is. The Ravens also coming off a bye week. Rams coming off a big win. They put up 36 on a Browns defense that we might be starting to question a little more than we were a couple weeks ago. Either way, 7 points I feel like is too many points for me to lay with the Ravens here. I like the Rams because I just liked where they're at offensively at this point. I think the run game is pretty good, even though that's a massive test against a healthy or a bye week Ravens team.
Yeah.
But I just like where the offense is right now at the Rams, and this will be a tough test. I also will say that I feel like I've been wrong in whatever side I've been on in Ravens games way more than I've been right this season. So take that for what you will, right? Like I just seem to be whichever way I'm rolling with the Ravens, I've just been wrong either way. But I just think this is too many points. So give me the Rams +7.
It's funny. Now that you say that, I kind of think I'm the same way. And I mean, that's not surprising. We do the show. And so we end up, I think, I'd 75% of the time probably on the same side, if not more than that. So that wouldn't be that surprising. But think about the Ravens games though, when like you actually evaluate like that, right? It's like Zay Flowers doesn't, slide down and takes off for that touchdown. And like that's the difference between being quote unquote right about that game or not being right about that
football.
Game. If you like the Ravens against the Browns, right, at home. And they're up 2 touchdowns with minus, 6.5 or whatever. And, then like everything that happens in the fourth quarter, including like
Aguilar onside kick, he didn't catch.
Well, and bounces off, helmet. Oh God. I'm going one at a time here. Is that there?
They had the Cards game that they did.
Oh, the Cards game. Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, again, wasn't even thinking of that game, but that's the Aguilar game, right? Where it's like if you were on the Ravens, especially at like any number basically higher than 10, you were like, or any number lower than 10, the 8, because it went from like 8.5 to 10.5, I think, something along those lines in that game. But you're sitting there going like, yeah, man, I'm on the right side here. I'm on the right side. And it's like, it's never, I was on the Ravens, but they let me down. It's always like, I was on one side and then something wacky happened. So whether, again, like it's, you can go back to like the Colts game from like week 3, which, I always go back to, but like, I don't know.
You have to stab me like that, man.
Listen, it's I have to pull a knife out of my own self for that. So, it's just, you look at it and you go like, I don't know, were we supposed to be correct about the Ravens that frequently? Because you've probably lost a lot of bets being right in Ravens games. So I wouldn't, sort of beat yourself up too much about that. But it is funny how like a lot of their games, the vast majority of their games have sort of gravitated to that wackiness. I mean, even right down to the Bengals, right? Where it's like Bengals go up 3 and Joe Burrow's out for the season. And it's like, I don't know whether the Ravens were going to cover that game or not, but like +3.5 when you're up 3, sort of midway through the second quarter. So you're probably, the live line was pick 'em. So you were certainly a favorite to cover if you were on the Bengals in that game. And then something weird happened. So I imagine something weird is probably going to be happening one way or another in this game. So long story short, I grabbed 7.5 when it was available earlier in the week, right? And obviously with the line moving down to 7.5 still available for a price less than -120, which is kind of like -20, sort of a false line of demarcation there. There's some -119s available on the +7.5. That's the number that I want to bet. That's the number that if I was to think about backing the Rams in contests, that's the number that I would want to see when those lines come out on Thursday. The Mark Andrews thing is an issue, I think, right, for their offense. And, maybe the Chargers defense is just as, way, way better than I ever thought possible. But 3 weeks ago, they were getting absolutely just run by the Detroit Lions up and down the field, right? So it's like, no, I think that's a Bailey Zappi Patriots issue. And honestly, I think that's a, something of an inefficiency issue, right, with the Ravens. So not psyched about the Ravens offense at the moment. Defensively, I think the Rams can do some stuff here because we have seen the Rams be, pretty efficient on offense. They started ripping off jet sweeps like the old days against the Browns, and probably, they ended up covering that, from a scoreboard standpoint relatively comfortably, but probably could have had a little bit more yardage if there wasn't kind of somewhat of a phantom hold in that game against the Browns on one of their jet sweeps. So with them getting sort of fully at, full health here with Kyron Williams, who's clearly the best running back on the Rams, and those wide receivers, Puka Nacua, a bit of an injury issue. We're still waiting for Cooper Kupp to kind of do more stuff out there. Like that's kind of a bummer because he might not be sort of at full health. Hopefully that's not a forever thing. That's just a kind of week to week type thing with his production, dipping well below what we're used to out of Cooper Kupp. I think the Rams are cooking a little bit on offense. And so I think this is one where, listen, the weather could be a little bit grimy and the score could be sort of tamped down a little bit. And that will, of course, make every point that much more valuable. And in this case, a half point above 7 is pretty critical in a game that may just end up being a 7-point game. But honestly, you could tell me that the Rams won this game outright, and I wouldn't be surprised. And looking at a money line of plus 250 or better, not the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, no, I'm totally there. I hear you. I'm with you. I'm feeling it. Let's go. Let's keep things moving here. From the Rams, we go to the Bears hosting the Detroit Lions. Lions at 3.5-point road favorites here. The Lions are playing really loose right now, right? I mean, they struggled to cover against the Saints, and we know the Saints are not about business. So why am I taking the Lions at 3.5-point favorites on the road against the Bears, who are coming off a bye week, right? The Bears played when? Like Monday. Like
That's
not
right.
This past Monday, the Monday before, right?
That's right.
I look at this game and I just think the Bears, even just watching them, that was a tough watch the last time we saw the Bears struggling to get to 12 points against a Vikings team. That was just a tough watch. Am I putting too much into that game in terms of the last time we saw the Bears?
I think so. I mean, and I think part of that is, right, like we've talked about how the Vikings are like this defense first team, which is like such a crazy thing to say in such a turn of events from last year where they were like all offense, no defense, and now we're week 13, week 14, and it's like, no, actually the Vikings are like all defense and no offense. Yeah. Obviously injuries are a factor there, and of course the defensive coordinator change, which by the way like attests to like coordinators matter in this league. You know what I mean? And people go like, oh, play caller, he gets fired. Like, is that going to matter that much? It's like, honestly, probably, right? Defense, coordinators getting switched here and there. Like, is that going to matter? It's like, yeah, actually probably is. So in this case, the Bears defense, I think, was the kind of thing that was the most impressive thing from that game a couple of weeks ago, even though, listen, it's Josh Dobbs. And I think the coaching staff from Minnesota, saw enough things that he missed. So maybe it was a little bit less about the Bears and a little bit more about the Vikings' inefficiency, and especially with regards to their quarterback. But it is funny that the Bears, like their strategy offensively, as we kind of thought, whether it was going to be getting Fields outside of the tackle box or to literally just throw screens over and over and over again on, to either side, was, they did that. I think they probably tried to throw the ball a little bit further down the field. It just, Fields wasn't really feeling anything that seemed all that open. But you don't have to go that far to get a comp for this game, because it was literally Bears and Lions from a couple of weeks ago, right? Yep. So the reason to like the Bears and sort of ignore that game against the Vikings is that the reality is the Lions defense is probably way worse than the Vikings, right? And like the Bears have enough stuff, whether it was being able to hit DJ Moore down the field in some open scenarios because the Lions secondary is just getting gashed over and over again. I mean, this is a team that took a 21-0 lead last week against the Saints and like couldn't really close it out, right? Like couldn't necessarily seal that deal. And that's a situation that, especially against Derek Carr and then eventually Jameis Winston, like that should be a pin your ears back and like take care of business type scenario, right? And they couldn't do it because like that's just where we're at with the Lions defense, who again got gashed by the Bears, gashed by the Packers, and gashed by the Chargers the week before that. Like, where's the good defensive performance from the Lions? Like, yeah, they might get an odd turnover here and there, but like that's the NFL, right? The ball is going to bounce your way sometimes, and in other ways, it's not. And so I just look at it and go, okay, like I'm not worried about the Bears offense in the same way that like I would have been against the Vikings. And by the way, like I like the Bears defense. Like they were the ones that were impressive again in that Monday night game. And like you mentioned, the week off, right? And it's a little bit different in the same way that's different with the Rams and the Ravens, Rams facing a team coming off the bye. It's like, yeah, it's one thing when you come off the bye and you're going against a team that's like given everything that they've ever had in their life into one game. That wasn't the case with the Rams against the Browns, and that certainly wasn't the case with the Lions against the Saints, right? So like it isn't about, oh, like the Bears are coming off the bye, but it is about like knowing that you have a plan or something that works and being able to put that into effect here against the Lions. And so, I don't know that they're going to win this game necessarily, but I'll take points plus 3.5 here. And we saw the line come down from 5. So somebody out there likes the Bears. Enough money has come in from, on +5, +4.5, +4 to get it down to where the number is now. And I know some people might be interested in the Lions, if as it got down to -3, it was some -3, with some juice on it that I think allowed this number to kind of come back to 3.5. But like, I understand why you might like the Lions at -3. Like, that might be an overreaction, but there is no real tangible, massive difference between +4 and +3 when it comes to, or +3.5, I should say, when it comes to liking the Bears here. So yeah, I think this is a highly competitive game. You get Jared Goff outdoors in Chicago in December. Like, that doesn't sound like a particularly appetizing scenario for our guy Goff, who just came off of a handful of games in a dome, right? So like, probably going to get a lesser Lions offense and a defense that we think kind of stinks.
Yeah. As I said, to start it, right? The Lions have been really loose. The pick has been changed. And the biggest thing is, as I remind myself here, especially down the stretch, sticking to certain principles and the importance of that extra half point of the 3.5. I will take that with the Bears. Change the pick. Bears +3.5. Let's keep it moving here. A kind of big boy game, or it should be a big boy game for the Seahawks here, as they are in San Francisco taking on the Niners. Niners, 10.5 point favorites at home. I am on the Seahawks here, +10.5. The reason being, hold on. The reason being is, again, talking about back to basics, sticking with principles, and starting with double-digit spreads with I'm taking the points, and let's talk myself out of it. Now,
Right.
The first thing in terms of double-digit spreads is, am I facing a functional quarterback and offense? And I feel like the Seahawks are a functional quarterback and offense. The Steelers are not, by the way, but the Seahawks are at least barely that. Right. I also just think the spot for San Fran in this point, obviously they can bury the Seahawks, but they already have the division kind of wrapped up if you're the Niners. But I feel like there could be just some letdown, right? Like, that's an emotional win in Philadelphia. The Niners could win this game by a touchdown and be cool, right? The Niners could win this game by 10 and could be cool. But, at the end of the day, last week's game against the Eagles was the big boy. Yeah, we're here to lay the smack down. This is circled on the calendar. We're ready for all takers, even your boy Big Dom. Everybody gets to smoke here. And they did that. So now the following week, they could have a letdown and still win by 10, and the Seahawks cover 10.5. So for that reason, that's where my starting point is. What say you, my friend?
Yeah. So, a couple of things here, right? And like, this is just another example of, an inequity when it comes to the schedule situation, right? Where it's Seahawks have the 10 days off from playing on a Thursday. Yep. And the 49ers just played like into the dark against the Eagles in, again, what was a very heated game. And, for all reasons that you mentioned, right? Very heated, revenge, prove that we would have won that game last year if Brock Purdy hadn't got hurt type of a narrative situation, right? Which, like, yeah, I'm not going to make the bet on that. I'm going to make a bet on the rest, element when it comes to the 49ers and the Eagles, in the same way that I'm going to bet on the Seahawks this week getting all of these points, right? So that's a pretty tough turnaround for any team, even a team that right now in the 49ers that is being rated basically historically great, right? Like, we are now into the territory of, this is what the line would be if, I have the Seahawks as a dead nut average team in the NFL, right? Talk me out of that. Tell me they're higher. Tell me they're lower. I think if we just stamped them as a 50 and never moved it, right, barring injury to a quarterback or significant cluster injury to offensive line or defensive line or something along those lines, the Seahawks are just a flat out 50. We have pushed this point to the point where the 49ers are like an 85 out of 100. This is the line that the Seahawks would have to go to Denver when Peyton Manning was the quarterback, right? That year where he threw 50 touchdowns. This is the line that it would be if the Patriots, the 2007 Patriots, the undefeated Patriots, like, this is what that would be with an average, team sort of contending for a wild card, what that would sort of look like. That's where we're at with the 49ers. And again, like, they can play to that level. It's why they keep covering these games when we say, like, man, the rating's getting crazy. The rating's getting crazy. Like, it keeps getting crazy. Like, next week, they are 13.5 point road favorites at Arizona.
Yeah.
It's like, and you'd be like, oh, it's Arizona. It's like, Arizona won a football game last week. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? On the road. So it's like, yeah, I get that Arizona stinks, but like 13.5 on the road. Like, that's some wild stuff. And so this is, different from a couple of weeks ago when the line was 7. This opened 12.5, by the way.
Ooh.
So like, you just look at 12.5 and you go, well, it was 7 2 weeks ago in Seattle. That's a 5.5 point difference, which is just too much for home field advantage, which is generally, a little bit less than 2 points on either side. So a full flip of home field advantage would be a little bit less than 4. And that's, how we get down to 10.5, 11 for this game. By the way, that was a short week. Geno Smith injury issues, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about the injury to Hufanga for the 49ers. Again, not an issue necessarily last week. But this Seahawks team, after that game against the 49ers, like they went back into the lab, so to speak, and we're like, hey, Geno, we're going to need you to throw the ball a little bit quicker. And let's see how that goes. And maybe that involves some timing routes to DK and, and let's get crazy and involve Jackson Smith and Jigba, who like at one point in our lives was like one of the best receiving prospects like in the world when he was in college. It's like, yeah, let's get some of these guys into the mix, shall we? And so I just think like whether they're down 17 late and like, need to have sort of that backdoor situation, or maybe they get up 10 points early on a 49ers team that felt like they sort of proved everything they needed to prove last week and maybe aren't necessarily taking the Seahawks all that seriously here. This might be an interesting Seahawks like race to 10-point type of a bet here. You let them get out early and see sort of where it goes. I imagine by the time that the game rolls around here, we might get back, not necessarily to 12.5 certainly, but you might be able to get plus 11. And when you're sort of talking about like ways that, scores where this could sort of end here, 11 is a number that I would be sort of, wanting to kind of wait and see if I can get. Mm-hmm. So plus 11 is kind of my target here. I certainly have not bet it. I missed out on the 12.5. And that's honestly, that's just how good the 49ers are, where I'm like, I'm looking at 12.5. I'm like, that's too high. But I'm going to need a minute to think about it. Right. Yeah. And like that day or those few hours that I was, quote unquote, thinking about it allowed that number to just vanish and get repopped or reposted at 10.5 after it got popped a few times at plus 12.5. So yeah, I'm with you here. Again, I don't think there's any worry of the Niners necessarily losing the game, but honestly, if they just had kind of a bad game and a bad bounce and a Purdy turnover here and there, and like all of a sudden the Seahawks, who are again fighting for their lives, and that's the other difference too, right? Are you fighting for seeds or are you fighting for your life from a playoff standpoint? Mm-hmm. Right. And the Niners were fighting for their life last week because that game was personal to them. This game, there's not really any reason why this game should be personal for the 49ers. It's personal for the Seahawks, though.
Totally agree. Last week, personal for the Niners, personal for Big Dom. Hope that I never see that dude again. Let's keep moving here too. The Broncos at the Chargers. Chargers at home, laying 3 points. The Chargers put up 6 points last week versus the Pats. Now, I understand the Pats defense is good. I totally get that. But you have Justin Herbert. I'm sorry, but I need you to put up at least a little more points than 6. And I know it's not his fault. I know it's not all his fault. I know there's a lot going on. I know he doesn't have weapons. I get all that stuff. Either way, if we flip it back around this way, Russ, I know we've been riding Russ for the last few weeks. He couldn't come through last week. Pick in the end zone to end the game. A tough one there. But overall, I still really like this Broncos team. And if you're telling me I can get points here with the aforementioned Chargers, that no matter the situation, no matter where they're playing, no matter rain, snow, dome, turf, they're in close games. So give me the points with the Broncos here at +3.
Yeah, if you think winning a 6-0 game against the Patriots is going to make me think you don't stink, I'm sorry. I still think that you stink. I think the Chargers stink, man. They got, forget it, like just only put up 6 points. They got outgained. 250. And like, listen, it wasn't an electric festival out there. 257 to 241. Bailey Zappi and the Patriots out there outgaining the Chargers.
Like, were you watching like every second of that game?
Every second of that game, man. Like I have 4 screens up. Speaking of the devil here, I had Broncos and Houston up. And it's funny how like we are acting. Obviously, this is a fourth quarter last drive, missed quote unquote pass interference call. But like I'm watching the first quarter of that Broncos Texans game, and I can't believe your guy Derek Stingley didn't get called for a pass interference early on in that game, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like he is not playing the ball. Like, yeah, he might have touched the ball at one point, but like he is face guarding the bleep out of I believe it was Marvin Mims, and it's like that flag gets thrown, and whether you like define it in like the strictest way imaginable, which I still think is pass interference, but even if you're like, well, he did this and he did this and that's okay. It's like, I watch so much football and I know whether or not it's like letter of the law. I know what a penalty looks like. I know what pass interference looks like.
It's the same thing with the MVS play.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say. And it's funny because that play happens at the end of the fourth quarter of a Sunday night game, and it's on the shows the next day, right? The talking head show's like, was this pass interference? Like, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, like the same exact play, by the way. Yeah. I mean, listen, it's never going to be the exact play. Like, I always hate when people are like, well, that play got called. It's like, well, like pretty damn close to the same play. First quarter of the game. And it's like, yeah, so Broncos end up punting. And I don't know what's going to happen the rest of the way in that game, right? But it's like them punting and the Texans getting the ball back then, or them going 3 and out, kicking a field goal, and then kicking the ball off to the Texans, I don't think it was going to drastically change the rest of the game, but it was going to end up 3 points more. I mentioned, obviously, the fumble where they strip CJ Stroud. Everybody on the Broncos is around this ball. A guy literally jumps on it, and it like squeezes out from underneath him and goes right back to the Texans, and they punt the ball, and then 2 plays later, or maybe it was a play later, Russell Wilson throws an interception. Like, again, you fall on the ball, and you don't do anything on offense. You kick a field goal there.
Yeah.
And like, that's the field goal that we need to make that game go either one of those situations, right? Pick one. And that makes the game go from 5-2 when the Broncos have that late drive. And so instead of there watching like the Broncos like crawl to try to get that final touchdown, it's like, no, actually they just run out the clock, kick a field goal, and just win the game outright. Or they don't, and they cover by losing by 2, right? Like, that's the tiny, like the razor's edge element to all of this stuff. So when you're saying like, okay, well, how do I handicap that going forward? If I look and I saw Russell Wilson threw 3 interceptions, he sucks again, and like the Broncos didn't cover, and like now they go to like LA, and LA shut out a team. It's like, it's very easy to talk yourself into the Chargers conceptually. But when you just watch the games, i.e. every single play of both games, like directly in front of me on the 2 biggest screens I have, and you're just sweating every play, like you realize like, man, I might not win this bet, but like I was on the right side here. And like, that's going to happen. That's okay. Unfortunately, it happens in the 2 biggest games of the day at the same time, which is like, as I'm trying to like, pump college football spreads into an iPad spreadsheet. But like, you just go, okay, like for next week, does anything about these 2 games that I'm watching play by play change anything that I think about next week? And the answer to that is like, no. And it's my money. Like, if it did, I would be like, okay, let's hit the Chargers, or like hope the Chargers get down to -2.5. Like, no, the Broncos are a playoff team and the Chargers aren't. And the Broncos are going to win this game. And honestly, I think they're going to beat the Lions in the week after, and we're going to be having some real Sean Payton. This is last call for Sean Payton Coach of the Year potential tickets here, as he got a little bump back up to, I think, 20 to 25 to 1, just because they lost to the Texans, which I get because DeMeco Ryans and things of that nature. But like, we'll see when it all kind of, comes out here. I think I told you this last week, man. I'm betting on the Broncos every game the rest of the season until the ship just absolutely crashes, Titanic style.
Yeah, and that's the important lesson too that I've found that has helped me throughout the last couple years make some more money, is like not being swayed by the final result as much, like understanding the process of it all. And just because the Broncos didn't cover last week, does that mean you're wrong about the Broncos?
Yeah.
Right?
Nope.
Different things going on. But anyways, we'll keep it moving here with what I like to call a mid-off. I'm going to start calling some of these teams where it's just like, who are these guys? What's going on? Even though this has big playoff implications, obviously, but we got the Bucs at the Falcons at home laying 2.5 points. And I guess like the Falcons, I don't know what to make of the Falcons. And I also don't know what to make of the Bucs, if I'm being brutally honest here. And I feel like I should just take the Bucs and the points, but I feel like when I ride with the Bucs, Baker happens and they let me
go. It's
so
funny.
I don't know here. I need to be talked into this here because this is a big game for both of these teams. So maybe it's as simple as, who do we have more faith in in like, hey, this is a big show me game for the, all the marbles, all the Tostitos,
I love that you're like, this is a mid-off, and I was like, man, there's a lot of contenders for whatever game's coming next. We don't talk about the order that we're going to talk about, and I didn't look up and see that you would put Atlanta already on the board here, and like, yeah, my initial instinct was sort of like, yeah, Atlanta, especially under a field goal, but then I was like, no, remember, like the Falcons are the team that can win this game without winning it by 3 points, right? Like they are, if a mid-off, if they're like the champions of the mid-off, they would win that game by 1 or 2 points, right? Like this is a mid-off championship. There are so many mid-off teams. How about we bet on neither of those quarterbacks to have particularly large success? And we do a little thing called the teaser, and we take the Bucs up to plus 8.5, because on what planet are the Falcons winning a game by 9 points, right? Like by 2 scores, like. I'll try, try me, right? And I mean, I realize I'm sort of daring them to do so. And obviously it's the NFL, right? Wacky stuff can happen. Close games can become not so close games late. You mentioned Baker, but like, honestly, and this isn't because he's rising up the rankings necessarily in like dudes I trust.
Yeah.
It's more just like every other team is sort of slowly falling. Whereas like Baker's just doing his usual deal, right? And he's got Mike Evans, and he's never had a Mike Evans before. And it's like, yeah, our offense might literally just be Mike Evans, and like we'll run for 2 yards per carry with Rashad White, and like, we'll just get down and like we'll just somehow end up winning like this game. And I kind of think that's just what's going to happen here again. But like, I kind of just rather use this game as a teaser leg. I'll probably have some Buccaneers, man, if it ever went to 3, like auto Buccaneers at that situation. And so when you say to yourself, like, I'm automatic on the Buccaneers at plus 3, I should probably be at least sort of leaning that way, plus 2.5. But like I said, at 2.5, until it goes down to 2, which like, who knows, it might at any moment. Let's get that thing up to 8.5. We'll talk about a game that you can tease that with here coming up a little bit later on.
Yeah, no, I hear you. We'll keep it moving with the Colts as 1-point favorites in Cincinnati against the Bengals. Jake Browning, get your Jake Browning jerseys. Let's go. We talk about our barriers here, and he showed to be more than functional. 354 yards and a touchdown, 32 of 37. At least what I know is they have a really good coach that came in with the game plan that didn't put him into like too many difficult scenarios, which if you look at the NFL at large, having a good coach is difficult to find. So I look at this and I say, speaking of mid-off, the Colts would also be in said mid-off competition if there was like a mid-off in-season tournament.
Like mid-off elite, though. This is like, this is teams that are like, you could make the case are good-ish.
Right? Ish. Be the key word there.
Totally.
I like the Bengals here. I like the Bengals here just because I think that their defense, I still like their defense as a unit. And I feel like maybe that'll be able to slow down the Colts, especially as they struggle with their running attack. But overall, Jake Browning showed me to be functional. He showed at least through one game that he's not going to lose them the game. So I'm on the Bengals here.
Yeah, and people got really wrapped up in that first game against the Steelers where it was like, oh, his only good completions were off deflections and like blah, blah, blah. It's like, we talked about this last week, like as if that's some sort of a rule that like that, that has to go the other way the very next week. And so it's funny, I wrote about that game, the game against Jacksonville for the score, and the bet that I kind of came down to was the over. And because I was like, I think the Bengals can score against the Jags. And it's funny how, if you talk yourself into that type of a bet, a lot of the time the total and the side sort of correlate.
Yeah.
But it was just like, well, the market has gone from 8.5 when I think you and I talked about it on the show last week to 10 over the course of the weekend. And it was just like, man, no one wants the Bengals here. And it's like,
yeah, it was.
I kind of think the Bengals can score. Yeah. Like, I kind of think the Bengals can score in this game. And it's like, well, if I think that, but I don't want to be sort of against this move towards the Jags, even though 10, like, it seems like a lot with the Jags. Like, okay, I guess like if I think they're going to get a couple of touchdowns here and I'm a little bit nervous about, them not covering, that kind of sets up like a 28-14, 31-17 type of game. So like, let's take over 39 and a half. But it's like, then you watch the game and you're like, oh yeah, they're moving the ball, they're scoring. And it's like, why didn't I take the plus 10 in right? As somebody who is more, apt to bet a side than a total. And so I look at it and I go, okay, well, what's changed for the Bengals? I mean, one, getting another game under his belt. Jake Browning after the game said, they asked him, like, what was the difference? And he's like, literally just playing a second game. Like, having that experience against the Steelers the first time, which is a game that they were competitive in from at least on the scoreboard perspective. Not that that's like some crazy accomplishment against the Steelers, but I don't even know if that's going to be that crazy of an accomplishment against the Colts. So I think I'm with you here because I looked at that Jake Browning's numbers even against the Steelers. And it's like completion percentage is pretty high. Wasn't turning the ball over hand over fist, wasn't fumbling the ball, right? Which you get into scenarios, as you mentioned, or sort of as you alluded to, with the coordination, right? If the coordination of the offense is, I need you holding the ball a long time, or I need you to make multiple reads, or all that sort of thing. They got out there in the first quarter and it looked all very basic, like wide receiver screen, almost kind of felt like a rope-a-dope situation, when in the second quarter, they're like throwing the ball like down the field. But the other element is like T. Higgins is back, and he didn't like light up the stat sheet necessarily, but like he draws some attention away from Jamar Chase, and he caught key passes for first downs late in that game and in overtime. And then the other thing is against the Steelers, Joe Mixon had like 15 carries for like 7 yards, or 8 carries for 15 yards, or something along those lines, right? Like basically like a complete zero if you had him in fantasy that week. And they're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to involve Chase Brown, the rookie at Illinois, Canadian kid. And he is like about 11 times faster than Joe Mixon. And like, I realize Joe Mixon serves his purpose, short yardage, like that kind of thing. He's pretty clearly not going to be on the Bengals next season. It's going to be one of those situations where is anybody going to it's going to be a Dalvin Cook situation, to be honest with you, where you're like, I thought he was good. And it's like, yeah, well, it goes pretty quick when it comes to a running back. You then see Chase Brown taking off like he has like been out of a cannon, right? Getting shot out of a cannon. So I just look at it and I go, okay, there's a couple of different explosive players there beyond Jamar Chase, who by the way, is still like bleeping awesome. And I don't think his yardage total this week is going to be in the 50s anymore, as it was the last couple of weeks where he's gone over really, really easily. So yeah, from an offensive standpoint, it's like, okay, like I don't hate the Bengals against kind of, quote unquote, mid defensive teams. So then it's an element of the defense. And you mentioned like the Bengals defense that is like, it's so crazy because it's like Lou Anarumo and like the coordination, and like he's always been so good with the halftime adjustments and this, that, and whatever. And then obviously the pass rushers and Hendrickson and Hubbard. And, so like there should be some skill on that side of the ball. But then you look at the metrics and like basically dead last against the pass from a yards per attempt standpoint, dead last against the run from a rushing. And then you watch them against the Jags and like, actually, that was pretty good. If they weren't trying Tyler Boyd like pass plays and Jamar Chase pass plays, like they might have, that might have been actually a relatively comfortable victory for the Bengals. Of course, it helped that, Trevor Lawrence got hurt late. You never know what would have happened even if they were trailing, if Lawrence could bring them back. But now it's a game against the Colts, who literally like probably should have lost that game pretty easily last week, except for the Titans couldn't block on punt coverage, right? Couldn't block on punt block coverage, I guess you would call it, right? And the Titans special teams coach literally got fired the next day for it. And so it's like, speaking of things that you can't really rely on week to week, is like blocking 2 punts for 10 points in a game that went to overtime, that, you made one big play in overtime and then, got down close enough to get a touchdown when you were down 3 points in overtime. I mean, how often do we get the, team goes down 3 points and still ends up winning the game in overtime? So, both teams kind of a jump and hug game. Like we always kind of have to be on our P's and Q's when it comes to the jump and hug game. But a second road game for the Colts here, I think, is probably what gives the edge to the Bengals, who get to come back home. And, you and I talked about it last week, where it's like, you and I think the Bengals are probably out of playoff contention. But the Bengals don't think that they're out of playoff contention, right? No. Like they're still looking around at the standings and being like, we're better than these teams. Sucks that we don't have Burrow, but like we again, this is them saying this, like we're better than these teams. And I think the Colts are a team that they probably think that they're still better than.
Hell yeah.
And we're getting a point with that team. And so, yeah, like as much as I looked and we talked about this last week, I'm like, I kind of like the idea of the Colts this week. And I hope that the Titans win so that we get a better number on the Colts. We get an underdog number potentially with the Colts. That's not what's happened here. And honestly, like I was kind of disappointed with the Colts' inability to take advantage of the Titans' defense, right? They certainly took advantage of them from a special team standpoint, but but the pass game was only kind of okay. A couple of nice long passes, long completions to Alec Pierce. So a little momentum, and you love the momentum, little momentum for the Bengals here at home, in probably a do or die game for them. But, I don't think the turnaround is too tight necessarily for them this week against a Colts team that I'm still not particularly sold on. And if you told me that Gardner Minshew turned the ball over 3 times, I would probably believe that more than I would that Jake Browning turned the ball over 3 times this week.
Yeah, for sure. Gardner Minshew was celebrating like he won the chip last year for sure. And I can't lie, I am a little salty as I was on the Titans last week.
Yeah. And again, another I don't think you were on the wrong side, right? You were expecting them to be able to block the defense on a punt, right?
Correct.
You went into that game going, I think they can get some punts off today.
I wasn't expecting the punter to get hurt, and then you got Tannehill in here holding a punt, holding the extra point or field goal. And then my guy misses, and it's like, really?
We never should have had overtime. Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
Right.
You're
all of the above.
I absolutely expected the punter to get hurt when I saw him get hit. No.
Yes.
you watch that guy get hit. You're like, well, that guy's never coming
back. There's part of me that also felt bad for Tannehill because it's like you haven't done anything in a long ass time. Right. It's like, you got to come out here and be the holder. I'd be shook, right?
Yeah, I don't do that. When have I done that? When did I say Tannehill's got more experience as a wide receiver than he does as a holder? I mean, as far as I know, I don't know. Maybe he has been holding in practice, but
super insane finish to that game. But just another reminder, kids, football.
Yeah.
The Jags at the Browns. Browns at home, favored by 3 points, and I'm on the Jacksonville Jaguars here. I'll say this off the front end. My question, obviously, is we know Trevor Lawrence is hurt, high ankle sprain. I'm assuming this is the non-Trevor Lawrence line that we're seeing here. But on the flip side, if that means we're getting CJ Beathard versus Joe Flacco in this game.
Electric.
I'm laying 3 points with Joe Flacco at home here. I don't know if that's a spot I want to be in, to be honest. Interesting twist to this. It has nothing to do with gambling. Yeah. My fantasy team is in a very tough spot this week as my 2 quarterback league. I have to start 2 guys. I need to win to make the playoffs. And of course, Trevor Lawrence goes down. So my choices are Jameis Winston
or Joe Flacco.
Joe Flacco, CJ Beathard, Jameis Winston, Zach Wilson off the top row. It's an electric factory. Or Mitch Trubisky. Forgot about him. It's an electric factory of options here.
I think that's Jameis.
No. It's Jameis go time. We're trying to eat some W's this Sunday.
That's right. Yeah, you get to post a meme in the chat group. That's
wrapping all the Luda. But Jags at Browns. Browns favored by 3. Sorry.
Yeah, we're just juggling ratings, right? For both of these teams in the same way we're juggling even just talking about this game where, okay, I guess, you're going to look at the score for that Browns game last week, and we had a feeling they weren't going to play necessarily great. We obviously have some issues with their defense. Mm-hmm. I talked about my article that last week, taking the Rams, about how the Browns defense on the road is not all that it's cracked up to be. It's not even very good. Mm-hmm. You throw in an injury, kind of hampering Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, et cetera, et cetera. And it's you're going to have a hard time stopping the Rams. And, they did, and they hung in there for a while, and it was very kind of sketchy. And then Joe Flacco eventually threw the interception. That is the reason that we were betting against Joe Flacco. So do I want to lay points with Joe Flacco as a concept? No, I do not. But do I want CJ beat hard in any circumstance here? I do not. Did I not pronounce it correctly? I don't want CJ. I mean, Christian Kirk is out, right? So it's going to be a lot of Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley bombs potentially. Your man's Parker Washington might be in our lives in a significant way.
Yep.
But you're going to get the Browns in their sort of natural habitat, right? They are basically a zoo creature. They need to be like in this certain like climate. And they are in this is a December Cleveland climate right here, right? So I think the Browns probably win this game at -3. Like, I think you take that, you give the Jags those 3 and you take your chances if you absolutely have to make a play here, because there's just too much of a situation here where it's like Jags, short week, going on the road. Speaking of like literal animals that are, shouldn't be in cold climates, Jaguars, from a literal animal's perspective or a figurative perspective, are like way out of their depth here, right? Like, this is a Florida team going to Cleveland when we already know that Cleveland's defense is just that much more effective, or at least statistically more effective. And those are not even during December conditions, right? Like, it was a windy day in September, or, like a brisk October afternoon. We're talking about December here. So like, does Jaguars in December on the road sound appealing to anyone? Well, no, but neither does laying points with Joe Flacco particularly. But that being said, I was impressed with Joe Flacco. And up until the point where he threw that interception, which again, I was delighted by as somebody who is on the Rams, I'm sitting there going like, where does Joe Flacco rank in quarterbacks? And like, honestly, I was questioning how difficult quarterbacking even is in the NFL if you have done it before, and whether it's one game for Jake Browning getting to play before he can sort of get it figured out, or get noticeably better, or like 20 years of Joe Flacco. It's like, oh yeah, he can run the tight end, like leaking out of the, off the right side on the strong side, and then leaking out the back side of he can run that play. He can run the play where the receiver runs, or the running back, I should say, runs, sort of a circle route and gets open. And by the way, he can also throw it super, super deep. So it's like, I don't know if the winds and the conditions in Cleveland are going to allow anybody to throw it super deep necessarily, but like, yeah, man, I think I want to find a way to play Cleveland just to win this game. Maybe this is like a money line with the Dolphins parlay, or a money line with one of these like big favorites that basically have no chance of losing. Which again, I think is probably the best example of that is the Dolphins. So this is maybe tying a Browns money line to the Dolphins on Monday type parlay situation. Because no, I don't want to lay points here. But if you're picking a spread, which you are doing, I would take the Browns here and dare the Jags to win on the road, or sort of come very, very close to it.
With CJ Beathard, who
who
I'm familiar with from his days with the Niners. And
I thought that's why you were picking him. You're like, I like CJ. I saw him in practice. I saw him in preseason. He can sling it. I thought that's where you're going to.
It's definitely not a thing. I judge you by how you work with Shanahan. And if you can't work with Shanahan,
do not get me started on that. Vis-a-vis the Brock Purdy MVP candidacy.
Oh, I'm mad at myself for not bringing that up when we were talking about the Niners. That has to be, as someone who watches the Niners, that has to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Like, what point of Debo, like literally living up to the name of Debo, right, Deboing through the defense twice for like 60 yards, and your takeaway is Brock Purdy's MVP. What?
Yeah.
Like, how does that make sense?
Just, every which way but loose. And it's like, I think it's like people have forgotten what MVP actually stands for. It's like most valuable player. Like, I give Brock Purdy credit for honestly probably being the guy who takes the 49ers from blank to winning the Super Bowl. But Garoppolo. But Jimmy Garoppolo was the guy who went to the Super Bowl and like cannot find a job essentially in the league. And I don't think like he got worse. I think he just stayed Jimmy.
Yeah.
And like, that's the circumstance.
No. He didn't stay Jimmy. He got away from Shanahan.
But that's what I mean. Like, yeah,
right.
he was always just Jimmy. And he was Jimmy under Shanahan or Jimmy under literally anybody else. Now, again, the Raiders being something of a mess. But it's like, if he was good, he would still be the Raiders quarterback. Yeah. Right? They would have fired McDaniels and he would still be the quarterback. And it's like, no, Jimmy Garoppolo stinks. And they made the Super Bowl because like Kyle Shanahan is awesome. And by the way, like, so are 5 all pros on either side of the ball, potentially. Like, what are we talking about here?
But the other part is
Kittle, Williams, Ayuk, Debo, like, Warner, Greenlaw, Bosa, Young, like. Buck,
the funny part is
talking about here.
The season already has taken place in which Debo and Trent were out and McCaffrey was banged up. Yeah. And if Brock Purdy was MVP, they might have won at least one of those games.
Yes. I know it all comes back to that time where he had the concussion and it was like, he might not start this week. And then it's like, oh no, he is going to start. And like, we were this close to a Sam Darnold start.
Yes.
And I just like I just want one Sam Darnold with everybody else trying. And just to see, I don't think it's going to be the same. I don't want anybody to think like, oh, you're trashing Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy's awesome. He is not the most valuable player in the NFL. Like, let's give our head a bleeping shake. And I don't think I honestly, I think they do win the rest of their games. The Baltimore one on Christmas night is going to be sick. I don't know who's going to win that game. That would be really interesting. Honestly, I think they go 14-3, but if you're literally telling me just because they went 14-3, Brock Purdy has to be the MVP, then we have absolutely mega lost the plot on this entire situation. Which we've already lost the plot on the Heisman Trophy, but don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, none of it seems to make sense. And the thing that I hate the most about it is it seems that like you have to shit on Brock Purdy, which is not the point, right?
No,
like,
and that's what
huge
I mean.
props to him. He's doing his job. He's following the reads. He'll step up in the pocket. He'll make accurate throws between the numbers. You know what I mean? And it's like
we used to make fun of Jimmy because it was like, oh, Jimmy's thinking. You don't want Jimmy thinking, right? And he would immediately like turn the ball over. It's like Brock Purdy can think, and that's honestly the difference. He can think on his feet, and it's like that's awesome. But you are not the number one most valuable player in the entire league when you can hand the ball off 25 times to Christian McCaffrey if you just wanted to get in and out of a game, right? Like it's heinous. Sorry,
agreed. Rant over, but that's okay. We understand. Panthers at the Saints. There's no MVPs in this discussion of this game here. Saints at home, laying 5 points. I mentioned could be starting Jameis this week in fantasy, so let's go. Saints laying the 5 points. Give me the Saints. That's not really why I'm taking the Saints here. The reason I'm taking the Saints here is because they're playing the Panthers. And the Panthers covered last week. You talked me into taking the Panthers last week, and they covered. Do I have that right? I'm pretty sure I have that right.
No, yes.
And the pick was switched. But now I got to say, you might have to talk me into it again because Derek Carr banged up. Doesn't seem like he will play, which means it's Jameis time as mentioned. I'm not even sure, though, if that makes them better or worse.
It makes them interesting.
Maybe that's the problem. Yeah, it makes them more interesting because I know Jameis will make things interesting. Boom or bust. Saints -5. That's where I'm at.
So I think a lot of people will tell you that like Carolina on the road, 5-point underdog, like against a mid NFC South team. We liked Carolina last week. Why wouldn't we like the Saints this week? And there's a handful of reasons. One of the things was for the Buccaneers last week, and you could see it coming down the pike, is that they were really, really banged up defensively. It was literally like a former Pro Bowl list of guys who defensively were out for the Buccaneers. And the Panthers were coming off of, firing the coach and getting some, JC Horn back and a couple other sort of depth guys in the secondary. And you saw the market move. Like when we talked about it was 5, it moved down to 3.5. Luckily, none of that mattered because they got a 2-point conversion. By the way, speaking of like the knife edge of 50-50 plays, they got a touchdown shortly after, by the way, like a ball that defied the laws of physics that somehow got to one of the Panthers receivers on a 4th down, 40 some odd yard gain from Bryce Young. Like if we're being honest about it, listen, they might have gotten another possession and, been able to get a touchdown and a 2-point conversion later on in that game. But that game came down to a ball like virtually going like through the arm of a Buccaneers defender. And like somehow I forget the Panthers receiver that caught it, but like a ball that like you wouldn't expect a mid wide receiver to ever catch. Yeah. And like that got them the conversion down towards the goal line. They get the touchdown, the 2-point conversion, right? All that stuff had to happen for them to cover that game. So like that was one of the other two that I needed, that, the 4:00 games that I was sort of waiting on. And of course it was a little bit less, obviously the money still counts the same, but from a contest perspective, it was a little bit anticlimactic from, for that week. So like in theory, you'd be like, well, if I liked it that week, I should like it this week. 1, Saints don't have that same defensive injury type setup. 2, Jameis Winston is one of the very few backup quarterbacks who sort of on paper is probably maybe not as good as the starting quarterback. But when he comes in, because of sort of the equity or sort of the whatever that he has in the locker room, his teammates are kind of like, okay, All right. Like, I don't think Derek Carr is like, man, we got Derek Carr. We're about to go to work, right? But like when Derek Carr goes down and he's not pointing at people and like coming off the bench like he's going to do something like he ever, he always looks the most confident for a guy who never does anything, right? It's like, okay, helmet on, here we go. That's Derek Carr. And everybody's looking at Derek Carr like, I don't think so, dude. Whereas Jameis, like the guys in that locker room remember Florida State Jameis, right? And while there aren't any MVPs in this game, there are a couple of first overall draft picks in this game. And so people respect, the guys I think on that team, on that offense, they respect Jameis because I think Chris Olave knows he's going to get a couple balls thrown his way deep, right? Yeah. We're gonna push it down the field. So while Derek Carr is bummed out because Juwan Johnson's not catching the like check down and the ball ends up in the Lions' hands, and that's what turns that game from 7-0 with the Saints ball to 14-0. He had guys open deep. Jameis isn't checking it down, right? Jameis is going for that ball deep. Now, I don't know if Jameis is going to make that throw necessarily. I don't know if that ball is going to get connected.
Give the receivers a chance.
But that's what makes it more interesting. So there's more possibility that Saints win by a significant amount than there ever was with Derek Carr, right? Derek Carr was, how do we keep this game close and find a way to win late? Jameis Winston is, we're going to get this thing figured out early or we're not, right? And it's going to be like, does the ball bounce the wrong way or it doesn't? So like, this might be one where like you're a quarter in and you're like, we got this, but it also might be one where you're like, nope, bad scene, Jameis is a problem, et cetera, et cetera. I happen to think it's the latter. Because that Panthers game, again, I felt really kind of fortunate to get out of there. I was impressed with the Saints' willingness and ability to almost come back in that game against the Lions. And then the other thing from a market and the number standpoint, like we mentioned the Panthers element to this, how is this that much different than Saints-Bears from 4 weeks ago, where the Saints are like -9? Right? I'm not saying they should be -9 or that we wouldn't absolutely be betting on the Panthers if they were -9, but like, under a touchdown, if it was under a touchdown of 5 or 6 weeks ago against the Bears and Tyson Bagent, I'd have been betting the Saints that day. And I would have covered because the Saints won that game by 7 points and the Bears weren't able to get the ball basically past half in the second half. Mm-hmm. Why are the Panthers going to be able to get the ball past half in the second half, right? Is Bryce Young that much better than Tyson Bagent? We literally saw them both on the same field on Thursday night a couple of weeks back. We know that there's probably not that much difference between the two. So, like, it's crazy to say, and I wouldn't be saying it if Derek Carr was starting, but, like, that guy's so banged up and mangled at this point. Like, honest to God, why would you bring him back out there? I like the Saints. I think the Saints win this game, like, pretty comfortably.
Let's go. I'm with you. I like it.
Jameis, maybe Jameis just runs it for the last like month of the season, and like Jameis Winston comeback player of the year starts becoming a thing.
Let's go.
Oh my God, what a time that would be to be alive.
What a time indeed. We got the Texans as 5.5-point favorites in New York taking on the Jets. Can't believe I just said that. Texans road 5.5-point favorites. Who's playing QB for the Jets? That's my question. Don't really know, but I will say I don't think it's going to be a man's Boyle. And as long as it's not him, I feel like I'm going to take the Jets at +5.5 because I just need someone to like not be as bad as Boyle and just move the ball, run the ball, hit some check downs, and the Texans can get out of here by winning by a field goal. Everybody goes home happy.
I tell you, I, for one, am shocked the Tim Boyle thing didn't work out. You look at the guy's college stats and like, how did this not work out? It's like, what else would one expect, right? Like, remember like Ben DiNucci? It's like, Ben DiNucci had a more storied career than Tim Boyle. It's just like, what was the thought process and all?
He can't even lace up Tommy DeVito's cleats.
Totally. Oh my God, Tommy DeVito's so much better. And so it's like, okay, no Tim Boyle. So when I say like, oh, it doesn't matter who the Jets quarterback is because we already know what the worst one is, right? And so like, Simeon's better. Zach Wilson is better. Obviously, commotion about whether Zach Wilson's interested in playing the rest of the season. People giving him a hard time because he may or may not have said that he doesn't want to play anymore. Like, wouldn't you You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you just be like, bleep this? Like, what?
We
You're
forget
doing-
how much football hurts, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah, and like, by the way, like, he's getting cut. He's moving on to another team, hopefully for him next year. And like, I don't think playing with this Jets team, with this Jets offense, is necessarily going to prove to anybody that like they need to take a chance on him. He's going to just have to do that in workouts and like catch on with the team as maybe a third quarterback and like be good in, you know, a new system and in practice and in training camp and all that stuff. So like him playing and potentially getting hurt, it does him no good. I don't even really blame him all that much. Problem is,
I blame Aaron Rodgers.
Problem is, Wilson does probably have to play just because on reputation in this league and like how this stuff works. But listen, Marcus Mariota quit last year, and all of a sudden he is the backup quarterback for the Eagles, and people are saying all kinds of crazy things about the potential of Marcus Mariota in that offense. But we'll leave that for another day. So all that is to say, I agree with you here on the Jets, because the Texans, and maybe I'm just like refusing to believe it, as the Texans rating goes higher and higher and higher, and they are up over the league average, you know, the part with the essentially the range that we thought that they probably shouldn't get pushed past. They are up past that. We talked about like why that might be a little bit of fortune against the Broncos. You know, obviously a heavy amount of home games here on their schedule recently. Now they go outdoors. No Tank Dell, who is a difference maker in that offense. And when he got hurt, the offense kind of dried up in a lot of ways for the Texans, right? They can't run the ball. So it's going to be all CJ Stroud all the time on, again, December conditions, et cetera, et cetera. Like we make fun of the Jacksonville, the Florida, the Jags, and them going to Ohio. I don't know that a Texans, you know, Houston, Texas team is supposed to just go into the cold and just like light it up against, again, a pretty good Jets defense here that, again, maybe it's Trevor Siemian again. You know, who knows who's going to be the quarterback, but this feels like a 10-70 type game. Like that, you know, the Jets can kind of keep this one close. And man, if they turn CJ Stroud over the way they did Jalen Hurts a few weeks ago, I know this is always kind of the case people make for the Jets. Like, oh, they're going to get it done now. But like, we're finally at a point, I shouldn't say finally, but like we're at a point here with this line where being up over 3 leads to a lot of possibilities where the Texans manage to pull this game out, but don't cover. And there was a lot of money that came in at +6 when this line opened at +6. And I think that had more to do with the fact that the Texans are probably a little bit overrated right now, especially with the injuries that they've had. Didn't even mention, right, offensive lineman that was injured before last week, Tyus Howard, if I'm not mistaken there. Like that's going to be a problem against the Jets defense on the road, right? A little bit easier at home when things are a little quieter. Hopefully it's a little bit louder in the Meadowlands on the Sunday game on Sunday.
Yeah. I got you. Jets +5.5 is the move there for sure. We keep it going with the Vikings at the Raiders. Vikings laying 3 points. Vikings road favorites at 3 points. Both teams are coming off a bye, and I get that, but I still can't. I feel like I'm in a tough spot. I need you to convince me into why I could lay 3 points with the Vikings. So I look at that and I start with the Raiders. Yeah. And I need to be convinced here that the Vikings should be laying 3 points on the road here.
I got to tell you, something's going to have to happen between now and Friday for this game to show up in my weekly best bets article in one way or another. I don't understand any of this.
Very weird.
Okay, Justin Jefferson's coming back. Okay, cool. Okay. Totally get it. We also might have Nick Mullins as the starting quarterback in this game. Like, it doesn't look like it's going to be Josh Dobbs. And so, like, whether it's Dobbs, who, like, by the way, if he's playing so badly that they are thinking about Nick Mullins, like, that's a bad sign, right? And if the idea is, like, we need to start somebody who's going to best get Justin Jefferson involved, that's probably not Jaren Hall, though I would love to see Jaren Hall play again. I was I was bummed out when he got hurt in the first quarter of his one chance. And then, like, what's left is Nick Mullins, which is just like, if Nick Mullins was good, they wouldn't have traded it for Josh Dobbs, you know, in the first place. And so I just go, how are they, you know, -3 here? My numbers come out to basically where this line was last week, which was like Vikings -1, essentially. Right? And so I just, I don't know how we're here. The problem with the Raiders is, like, they are following that path that I thought they might follow, right? Where it's like big, you know, coach bounce, off of, the firing of the coach. You get that for a couple of weeks. You get that for a week. You get a win there. Helps that the Giants, lose Daniel Jones in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Then I believe they won the next game as well, if I'm not mistaken. But that was forget who that was. But then they go to Miami, right? And they're still like playing hard, and they cover that game. But you could tell like they were getting outgained in that game, and it was a bit of smoke and mirrors. But they almost,
it was a win against the Jets. So they beat the Giants and they win against the Jets, and they went to Miami.
Right. And it's like, cool, you beat the Jets. That's, I was going to say, some janky below mid team. That's right. And like, I still kind of can't believe they even won that game, even though, it's the Jets. Mm-hmm. And then they go and they compete hard, but don't cover against the Dolphins. And then they come out really well against the Chiefs, but then the Chiefs kind of blow them out late. And I just kind of worry that like you can sort of see that sort of vibe, for lack of a better term, kind of falling back down where, it's going to be a point here where like it's all kind of run out, right? And it's just kind of like the writing is on the wall as far as the season is concerned. I just don't know if that's this week, or whether that's like literally maybe next week when the Chargers come to town, or maybe they just keep the vibes right? And they get a win as underdog here, and then they beat the Chargers, who again, I don't really think all that highly of at this point, right? Like, and then they go and they get trucked again by Kansas City the next week. Like, there's just so many different ways the Raiders can go, and there's so many literal different ways from a quarterbacking perspective that the Vikings can go here, that like, I'm not going to talk you out of Vegas +3, but like, again, something wild has to happen between now and Friday that makes me go like, yes, this is the side that I absolutely want. I mean, to me, it's just never the Vikings. And then it's just like, I don't know, maybe a little Raiders +3. I don't know.
No, I hear you. A weird one there for sure. When in doubt, take the point. Hey, Sunday Night Football, massive matchup in the NFC East. You got the Eagles at the Cowboys. Cowboys at home, laying 3.5 points. Sheldon says Philly +3.5. But the reason here, because I'm going to say this is odd, because I like the Cowboys in this game, but it's the hook that's making me hesitate on the points here. And, the Cowboys, it's the hook and it's Mike McCarthy. Because I always need to remind myself of the Cowboys beating up on bad teams and Mike McCarthy being a bad coach in close games. Yep. I think this is going to be a close game late. I do not trust Mike McCarthy, and that makes me lean towards the principles of taking the hook here in the Eagles +3.5. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, chicken and an egg situation for me here, because it's not tough for me because I have long been a proponent of the Cowboys this season relative to the marketplace, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look at it and you go, okay, the Eagles are this price to win all this stuff, and the Cowboys are this price to win all this stuff, I think it should be about even. And the Cowboys were way, way, way like lower or better priced, right? Longer priced, longer odds. So I bet all that stuff, whether it's Dak MVP or this, that, or whatever. And then I wait 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, guess what? Dak and Jalen Hurts are in the same spot, roughly, along with your man's Brock Purdy, for league MVP. And Dak is here for, passing touchdowns and yardage, and CD Lamb is in the mix, and all of this, stuff. And it's like all of that stuff is essentially coming to a head in this game. Mm-hmm. And so when I talked about it last week, how this was going to be the biggest bet of my season, it isn't just the game, right? It's the leverage that all of this other stuff hinges on. And the look ahead line, as we talked about last week, was -2.5. Mm-hmm. Well, -2.5, Shell, which one were you taking?
I would have taken the Cowboys.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, of course at -2.5, that was going to be a big bet. 3, a little bit less so. I mean, it doesn't matter. You make that big bet and it lands on 3, you get your money back. So like no harm, no foul. 3.5, now all of a sudden there's a lot of ways that this game ends 3, especially with this absolute moron coach of the Cowboys who's throwing the ball on 3rd down into the end zone as if a touchdown there like gets you really anywhere relative to like what you're risking against the Seahawks late in that game, where it's like just run the ball, get tackled, 45 seconds come off the clock, then kick the field goal. And by the way, you might even, dare I say, get the first down to end the game. Like, it was wacky why he was going. But it's like, it's not the first time. He did the exact same thing against the Chargers. on the Monday night game a couple of weeks before that. And so it's like, it's not like somebody said to him, hey man, like you screwed up that play. Like, don't do, like, this is how we want to play those going forward. He literally did the exact same thing, as if they have like the bizarro analytics guy telling him to do the exact wrong thing, like a sleeper cell from the Eagles or the 49ers telling him to do all the wrong things to like somehow screw up this team that like probably should be a lot better or a little bit more dominant than they necessarily are, especially from a defensive perspective. But you go, okay, well, why did it go from 2.5 to 3 to sort of, it's kind of minus 3.25, right? So like you're paying a little bit of juice to get minus 3. You're paying a little juice right now to get plus 3.5, right? For the purposes of this thing, right? I can allow that you'd be, able to get plus 3.5 in the market. And the problem is like, that was all kind of the story last week for the Eagles against the 49ers, where it was like, no, this number should really almost never be minus 3 for the 49ers. But the scheduling circumstance is such that like the Eagles, as much as the 49ers want to crow about winning that game, like that's not indicative of what might happen in the playoffs, because you're going to be on more equal terms in the playoffs. Now, of course, the idea is the 49ers have better rest because they end up getting the first seed and they get to play at home and you don't have to ever go back to Philadelphia. Right? That's obviously the key to that game, which sucks for Philadelphia because now they're on their 4th straight kind of showdown game here, right? Where you had Super Bowl rematch, the best Bills that you were ever going to get, the best 49ers that you're ever going to get. And now you've got the Cowboys on 10 days rest, right? So thematically, as we've talked about throughout this podcast, these are the situations that like, yeah, man, that's how they end up losing by 25 or whatever it was last week to the 49ers. Because by the end of it, there's just like, you know what? Run the screen to Debo. Fine. Like we can't get, like we're going to tackle him. Like, come on. Right. So I don't think the Cowboys are going to win this game by 25 because unfortunately McCarthy's such a dope that they're probably not capable of doing that. In fact, they're probably capable of winning this game by 10 and having him screw something up to the point where the Eagles maybe kind of get a back door here. The problem is like, I still don't know. This is going to sound really like crazy, but like, I don't really know if the Eagles are quote unquote that good. Like we talk about the advantage that they have by playing essentially 1st and 8 on every drive.
Yeah.
But again, like you go back to last season and it's like, I don't want to beat the dead horse here, but like look at the schedule that they had last season. What they are able to do with that schedule is commendable. But then they get the break and again, the 49ers can tell me that they were going to win that game if Brock Purdy doesn't get hurt. I can't tell them that they're wrong. Yeah. But what I can tell you is it would have been a lot closer than having no quarterback, right? So it's like a pretty fortunate situation for the Eagles, right? And then obviously the Super Bowl, everybody's going to get up for the Super Bowl. They did a nice job of competing and almost winning that Super Bowl. But now you're starting to see this season where there's some holes in the easy games that they've had, right? Where it's like, oh man, things got a little closer against the Commanders twice than we ever kind of thought possible. And they won pretty convincingly against the Dolphins, and people got kind of excited about that. But that was kind of a nice situation for them, schedule-wise, where like they got the home field advantage against a Dolphins team that isn't quite sort of, fully baked, if you will, right? As far as, some of their personnel, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's like now they're playing in these tough games, and people are sitting there watching the game against the Chiefs going like, is this team good? And then they win the game. You're like, okay, cool. And then you're watching them against the Bills, and you're like, man, the Bills are like working them over pretty good. And then they win the game, 59-yard field goal and like pulling it out. And it's like all very cool for the Eagles. Don't get me wrong. But it's like, man, watch, if you watch every single play as its own unique play, like they are not better than than those two teams.
Yeah.
And they certainly weren't last week against the 49ers. So I just sit here and I'm like, would I be shocked that the Cowboys win this game convincingly? And like, am I going to just not take, am I not just going to bet minus 3.5? It happens. Listen, I've already bet minus 3. You guys probably already figured that out. But like, am I not going to take this minus 3.5 in a contest because I'm worried about the hook? It's like I've already got so much committed to the Cowboys anyway.
Yeah.
Like, minus 3.5. Like bleep it, man. Like just I'll take that. Guess what? It's going to be one of my 5 plays in a contest, no matter what the point spread is, because I don't want to feel like an idiot when they win this game by 20 points like the 49ers did last week. But people get scared away because this probably isn't going to be the point spread in the playoffs if it gets to a point where in the second round, the Eagles have to come to Dallas. That number is going to be 2.5. Mm-hmm. You're going to have the scheduling, the same scheduling, level playing field, if you will, from a scheduling standpoint. But that's just not what this is. And we just saw it last week where like the schedule is really kind of beaten up on the Eagles, a thing that they never really had to deal with last year. So it's not really a
at all.
slight on the Eagles. It's just like, man, like sometimes like it's the NFL, man. The schedule is you're gonna have a soft portion of your schedule. You're gonna have like a tough portion of your schedule. And by the way, the Cowboys are coming up on that tough portion of their schedule, starting with this game. But that's the point. One's starting and one's finishing the tough portion of their schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, I'd rather take the team starting the tough portion of the schedule.
Yeah, I hate this game, but I can't wait to watch it because I don't know what will happen. I think I'll be primed to in-game bet this game, one side or the other, once we get going. Monday Night Football. We got 2 games on Monday night randomly here. Don't know what's going on.
Why. No one has any idea why.
The Titans at the Dolphins. Dolphins laying 13 points at home. That's a lot of points. I know Miami beats up on bad teams, but again, what are the rules here? Do the Titans have a functional offense and a functional QB? And again, we're talking about the Dolphins defense. I'm on the Titans plus 13. I think they do have a functional offense. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Miami's defense is very interesting to me. I'm interested to see how this game plays out. Could they win this game by 2 touchdowns just based on offense not being able to keep up? Cool. But I don't like to bet on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Give me the Titans and the points here, plus 13, because that's also the starting point in the double-digit spreads. And if you have to talk me out of it, that's what we do.
I think I'm going to try to talk you out of it, man. I think the Titans, that game last week, a couple of games last week, right? Like, think about the Commanders. I think of the Titans the same way I think of the Commanders right now.
Ooh, I like that.
Where the Commanders were like into it at the start of the year. And it's like, Sam Howell doesn't stink. And like, we won a bunch of games. They're like 4-3 or something along those lines, competitive with the Eagles. If those 2 games go, a different way, which they very easily could, and all of a sudden the Commanders have 6 wins. Maybe they don't trade Chase Young and Sweat. But that's not what happened. Right. Yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, by the way, like against good teams, like the defense is they're just a mess from a coordination standpoint, right? Fired Jack Del Rio and then basically refused to double team Tyreek Hill, or at least at various portions in that game against the Dolphins. And honestly, the Dolphins probably could have hung another 70 if they really, really were dying to in that game against the Commanders. In, by the way, like conditions that like we're not supposed to like the Dolphins in, right? Kind of scummy, like December, rainy, like type conditions. It's like, no, it wasn't a problem at all. And so I look at the Titans and I go, how is that not the same thing? Where it's like, Will Levis, we got something here with Will Levis. And then it's like, well, a couple of losses. Then, like a close loss, obviously, last week where like the punting, obviously all the stuff that we just mentioned, right? And then you look up and you're like, we are in dead last in this division. And that will actually probably serve us well for next season, in that they'll get the last place schedule, right? Where you end up getting the Raiders instead of the Chiefs, and you end up getting the Jets or the Patriots, a rebuilding Patriots team, other than, those other teams, and an Aaron Rodgers Jets and a Dolphins and Bills. And you get like whoever ends up finishing dead last in the AFC Central, or excuse me, AFC North. Still don't know who that might be, but it might be the Kenny Pickett again, right? So like you kind of just go, all right, that was kind of maybe our last hurrah there. And having watched that game and watched the game against Carolina, and we talked about this last week. I was watching that game against Carolina, hoping the Titans covered. They covered, and it was the opposite, I think, of what we were talking about with regards to the Broncos and the Patriots, where it's like, we won the game, but I'm like, I don't really want anything to do with the Titans here going forward. Mm-hmm. And 13 sounds like a lot of points, right up into the point where you're in Miami on Monday night, and it's just like the most fun the Dolphins have ever had in their life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they score, again, against the Titans defense that is not good, especially against the pass. And you go, like, what are the Dolphins going to score here? I mean, isn't 42 like a very reasonable like number for just the Dolphins? The Titans are going to score more than 28.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it seems like 40, 35, let's say 35. Like, isn't it 35-17?
Yeah.
Game? Which is like almost like that's almost a moral victory for the Titans. Like the defense, it's not the old Titans where it's like Vrabel, like special teams and defense. It's like, well, we already know the special teams is like not up to snuff. and the defense isn't any good, right? And so, neither is the motivation. This isn't week 3 where it's like we still got a chance to like do something here.
Yeah. No, for sure. The pick has been changed. We are switching gears here to the Dolphins at -13. -13.
Yeah.
We close things out here with another Monday nighter. The Packers as 6.5 road favorites in New York, taking on the Giants. I understand the Packers are rolling here. I get it. I understand it. I still need convincing in terms of taking them to lay 6.5 points on the road against the Giants team coming off a bye. And I know it's still Tommy DeVito. I understand it's still the Giants, but coming off a spread or coming off a bye on Monday night, my initial lean here is to take the Giants in the points.
Yeah, I think I'm with you here. It's probably going to go horribly wrong because it's a New York team in prime time at home, and it always sounds like a good idea and then isn't. But, again, from a valuation perspective, right? It's a little bit tricky because like I like the Packers. I like what I've seen from the Packers. That's why we were on the Packers last week. That's why I thought they could win last week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is also a very tough spot where you go from home Sunday night game, like all eyes on us, to we now got to go to the Giants, a game that we think we can win. They probably can and probably will, right? But you got to do so by margin instead of just like hanging in, and like we would have been content. I mean, technically we would have been content if they had lost that game against the Chiefs, right? If they had lost by 3 points or whatever from a point spread, betting perspective. So, again, it's another situation where it's like Sunday night game, like wasn't necessarily jump and hug, but like a feeling really good, pat yourself on the back type situation of that game. Which, by the way, I don't know that we're going to see Christian Watson in this game, and he was a pretty significant element. And by the way, he's a guy that we kind of were hoping to get involved in the season here for the, for people who thought the Packers might have a decent chance, to do something this year. And then, like, guess what? He's like the key guy on some pretty sweet, nice catches to beat the Chiefs. And it's like, okay, he goes out, and it's like, yeah, they have a bunch of other good guys on that team, but it's a road game. It's a game against a Giants team who is rested. And like, if Tommy DeVito gets hurt, what was the plan going to be in the past, weeks? It was going to be pretty gross. They at least, if something goes wrong with Tommy DeVito, have Tyrod Taylor back in the, for this game. So it's like you have a little bit of a backup plan here, quite literally. But like DeVito, we talked about it. Like same thing with Jake Browning. These guys who, by the way, had a lot of experience, at least taking snaps in college. It's like you just give them another game, give them more practice, right? Give them a week's worth of practice. How about 2 weeks, with that bye week of practice? And it's like they should be able to do just enough here, I think, to make this competitive. We're going to have 2 games on Monday Night Football. I don't know, by rule, one of them's got to be competitive. I don't know if that's actually the rule, but like, listen, it's an experiment here where I don't think the competitive game is going to be in Miami between the Titans and the Dolphins. I think it's going to be competitive here. I like the Packers to win this game, but 6.5 is, it's based on a rating that has been boosted up because of what happened last week with against the Chiefs. And over the course of this season, that might bear out because honestly, I think the Packers can very quote unquote easily win the rest of their games and get that 6th seed, maybe even give the Lions a run for their money for the division here if maybe the Lions lose this weekend to the Bears and then have to go to Dallas in a couple of weeks, right? Like it shapes up where we could get a little bit interesting here down the stretch. So I think this isn't a slant on the Packers. It's just we're talking about 6.5, and by the way, like you probably get 7 at like a -117 price. 7 cents, $7 for to go to +7 here from a betting perspective. I think that's, somewhat valuable.
Just makes too much sense here. And a good thing to pay attention to, as of course we know these lines tend to change, especially if you tune back in on Monday to see where these lines sit. But in between now and then, where can the people find you online to get the whole grain goodness that you dish out?
Yeah, buddy. At MRuss Authentic for all the celebrating and commiserating the ups and downs that is a football week, where you go from can't possibly win to can't possibly lose in the matter of just a couple of hours. But as far as a content perspective, we've got a ton of stuff over at The Score. Talked about the college football, all 41 bowl games, what the point spread was going to be if all things were equal, what it opened at, and what it is, at least as of Monday afternoon. We've even seen some moves. You can kind of compare and contrast, like where we thought the line should be, where it is now, that kind of thing. For all 41 games, that'll be up throughout the entire bowl season. Of course, we'll have bowl game by game best bets for basically, I think the plan is every single one of these bowls starting next week. And of course, all the NFL stuff you can shake a stick at here. Fun little plug here. We're working on an article. I don't know when it's going to be out necessarily. I'm going to try. I think I can predict every point spread for every wild card round game in the playoffs. I think I can do that right now. I can tell you what the point spread is going to be between the 2 and the 7 in the AFC. Don't even know what the teams are, but I think I can predict what the point spread is. So we got an article going up at some point about that. You'll be able to, we'll have that. And then you'll be able to compare it in 5 weeks from now. You'll be like, how wrong was Russell? How right was Russell? All that kind of fun stuff. So going to try also predict when the games are going to be. The 4-5 on the Saturday afternoon. Is the 2-7 going to be in the Sunday night game? Like that kind of fun stuff as well. So that should be fun for people to check out over the course of the next month.
I got you, my dude. And for me, you can follow me online on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Lots of different stuff going on there. We got Raps post-game shows. We got the DVP pod. We got the You Killed It pod. Great season of the challenge going on right now. I don't know if people are into that, but I am, and it's fun stuff. Lots going on. Just follow the accounts for all the updates there. And of course, like and subscribe to this pod wherever you get your podcast, because you know where you can find us, the places that you're listening to this now. Tell your friends, help them. It's Christmas time. Everybody needs a little extra cachet right now. So why not tune in? And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.